Welcome to Insight by GovSight. I'm Insight host Andy Pierce. This podcast was recorded on the evening of Friday, April 23rd, so some facts may have changed by the time you listen. This week, we're talking about West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin and how he could affect the Biden administration's policies, a deep dive on unions and what happened with the vote for a union for Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama, and finally, an obituary on the life of Vice President Walter Mondale. This is The Insight. The American Jobs Plan is not only focusing on improving American infrastructure, but also hoping to create more jobs with better pay, safer and healthier work environments, as well as give the people that are employed a chance to organize and join a union. For more on unions and how they will be affected by the new infrastructure proposal, we have GovSight reporter Carlos Alfaro Rodriguez. So, Carlos, what are unions?
So unions are an organization of workers formed for the purpose of advancing its members' interests in respect to wages, benefits, and working conditions. That's the dictionary definition according to Merriam-Webster.
How do unions work, and what are the benefits of joining a union?
So unions work like a democracy where they elect officers to make decisions on behalf of the workers. Some of the benefits range from higher pay, better benefits, and a voice on the job. It gives the individual worker a part of a collective voice to express opinions on matters like work hours, benefits, pay, wages, and workplace safety, among other benefits.
So would there be any reason why people would oppose unions?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it's about a lack of education on the subject of unions. Other times it's more emotional. For example, union employees are generally paid more than non-union employees, so there may be some bitterness there.
Do businesses typically oppose unions?
It can depend, but there is a lot of opposition towards them when it comes to pay. Unions generally demand higher labor costs, so hiring a union employee will, of course, cost more, and there's also the possibility of strikes when hiring union employees.
And how are unions typically formed?
So union is formed one of two ways. At least 30% of workers sign cards or a petition saying they want a union, and then that heads to the National Labor Relations Board to conduct an election. And if a majority of voters in the election choose the union, then one is created. The employer can also voluntarily recognize a union based on evidence that a majority of employees wanted to represent them as well.
And typically in a union, there's always some annual negotiations and union contracts. What do you think are the most important topics that are negotiated specifically with those contracts?
So it can depend on workplace to workplace, but generally some of the most important topics are wages, benefits, and working conditions.
And how would unions typically negotiate with an employer?
So they do so through collective bargaining, which is a process where unions and employers determine their terms of employment. The employer works with the union representative to come to terms favorable for both sides.
And with the new infrastructure bill, the American Jobs Plan specifically, what do you think that unions will be affected? And in what ways, how would they be affected?
I think that in the American Jobs Plan, Biden really wants to make unions a part of the partnership among different groups to achieve job growth.
And supposedly, with this infrastructure bill, there's going to be new categories pertaining to the infrastructure, specifically like with our economy. Do you think that there's going to be new industry of unions popping up? Where and why?
Yeah, definitely. So there's definitely an increase in unionization in industries such as healthcare, service, education, and logistics industries, among others, reflecting what we've seen during the pandemic. Some of these industries are experiencing rapid growth, and some of them are unable to avoid expansion without entering into territories with active union organizing.
And more recently, there was news about Amazon, and there was supposedly a push for formation of a union in Bessemer. Do you know what caused that push to form that union?
So the work conditions inspired the workers to attempt unionization. One employee described it as grueling. There were reports that each employee only got 30 minutes of break time for a 10-hour shift. Also, higher pay, more break time, and general respect were factors that went into deciding to try to create a union.
So then, why hasn't there been a union in Amazon before? So far, this would have been considered one of the first unions, correct?
There's been a few attempts before, but they've all failed. The last attempt in 2014 was at an Amazon warehouse in Delaware. That one failed too, of course. Amazon has also had a storied past of crushing unions at its warehouses and Whole Foods grocery stores.
So, what are some of the things that Amazon has done to combat unions?
They've used various methods. There's been intimidation of employees, employee monitoring, threats of firing, among others, have been some ways that they chose to combat unions.
And there was most recently, like with Bessemer, there was an election to form the union. How did that end up turning out?
So the union lost the election. The majority of voters elected not to form it.
And do you know why it was voted down?
Amazon was very, very good campaigning against the union with its messaging. There was also a young workforce who entering this job is some of the highest paid that they've seen. There was also generally a very low voter turnout as well. And Amazon does offer very generous benefits, such as day one healthcare, which some employees potentially saw as too good to try give up.
That definitely would be a huge reason why some people would turn things down. So then, for the people that wanted the union to happen, what are the next steps for them? Do you think that there'll eventually be another attempt at forming a union again?
I think that as one of the strongest attempts, there definitely can be another attempt in the future. The Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, which is a union behind this push, is intending to file objections and unfair labor practice charges with the Labor Board. The failure can also fuel support for the union-friendly Protecting the Right to Organize Act as well.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
The 117th Senate is split 50-50 on party lines, with Vice President Harris holding the power to break a tie, meaning that it would appear that the Democrats would be able to pass legislation more easily with a majority vote. But there is one Democratic senator who might throw a wrench in those plans and has been called by Senator Chris Coons as the 50th vote because they can't pass it without it. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. While he is a Democrat, he's also a wild card when it comes to aligning with his party in the Senate. When former President Donald Trump was in office, he split with his party and voted with Republicans on Trump's immigration policy, domestic energy production, and confirming Trump nominees like Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Manchin publicizes on his website that he was the only Democrat to vote with Trump administration 74% of the time. He voted against Trump when it came to repealing affordable health care, nominating Amy Coney Barrett, and the Trump tax cuts and Job Act of 2017. He also voted to remove Trump from office after the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6. Now that Trump is out of office, with the Democrats holding most of the power, Manchin has made it clear to Biden that if anything gets passed, there needs to be bipartisan support. Let's break down three big upcoming issues that Manchin's vote will be critical for Senate Democrats: minimum wage, the American Jobs Plan, and the filibuster. One of the first pieces of legislation on the table after President Joe Biden took office was the American Rescue Plan, a $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill, which originally included a $15 per hour minimum wage increase. Congressional Republicans and Democrats fought over whether or not it should be included, and ultimately it was taken out. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, said that there could be a future legislation to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15. If there is future legislation, Manchin could vote against his Democratic colleagues who supported raising the minimum wage. On February 2nd, in an interview with The Hill, when asked if he supports the minimum wage being raised to $15, he responded no, and that he is supportive of having something that is responsible and reasonable. He also suggested he would support pushing it to $11 and have it adjusted to inflation. Next, the American Jobs Plan, arguably one of Biden's most ambitious proposals yet. The plan would delegate $2.5 trillion for infrastructure, which includes things like waterways, roads, and bridges. The money would also be directed at the so-called care economy, or the section of our economy that provides access to caregivers for citizens with disabilities and the elderly. It would raise wages and benefits for essential home care workers and widen broadband internet access. It would raise corporate taxes from 21% to 28% to pay for most of the bill. While congressional Republicans tend to support bolstering infrastructure, many have said that the bill is excessive and includes provisions that are not related to infrastructure. Many have expressed concern that increasing the corporate tax rate could have severe effects on the economy and employed American citizens. Manchin said he supports the bill, but shares some of the same concerns of his Republican colleagues. He has said that the corporate tax rate could be raised to 25%, but that 28% is too much. He also said that he hopes that a redesigned bill gets bipartisan support, All Democrats in the Senate would need a vote yes to pass the bill with a majority. Manchin could prevent it from going through until there is bipartisan support by withholding his yes. Lastly, for the segment, the filibuster rule, which provides that there must be unanimous consent to end debate on a bill. Otherwise, there must be a supermajority of 60 votes to move a bill to a simple majority vote, where 51 votes are needed to pass into law. If there are less than 60 votes, the bill is blocked. This filibuster rule is called cloture. How was the filibuster created? In 1805, when Vice President Aaron Burr was delivering his farewell speech to the Senate, he had suggested what makes a great Senate is a good rule book. He points out the rule called the previous question motion, which was used to cut off debate and bring the House to an immediate vote. This rule in the Senate was rarely used since the Senate at the time was smaller and they typically aligned in agreement most of the time. In 1806, the rule is removed from the Senate, and that made it possible to debate for an unlimited amount of time, thus creating the filibuster by accident. Still, no one recognized this was possible until after the Civil War, when Congress grew more Senate seats and they were polarized when it came to subjects like civil rights, election law, and nominations, for example. Without the previous question to motion, senators could debate endlessly. Then by 1917, 3 years into World War I, the U.S. had not entered the war, and President Woodrow Wilson proposed to Congress to arm merchant ships as a way to protect themselves from German U-boats. The proposal was filibustered, and President Woodrow Wilson was furious. He demanded that the Senate create a rule to end debate. So Senate Rule 22 was conceived, and that allowed the Senate to invoke what's called cloture, a procedure to end debate with 2/3 of a majority vote. Over the next several years, senators would take the floor and deliver long speeches that take anywhere from 13 hours to a full day to block a bill from passing. The longest record for a spoken filibuster was held by Senator Storm Thurmond of South Carolina, who spoke for 24 hours and 18 minutes in hope of blocking the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Then, in 1975, the votes were changed to 3/5, which brought us to our current rule today. Because of this adjustment in votes, senators no longer need to talk for hours. Instead, if the minority had 41 votes, they could block a bill. On the Senate database, the amount of times the cloture rule was invoked from 1970 to 1972 each year is low, with the most votes for cloture being 7 times in the years 1969 through 1970 and 1971 to 1972. It really is not until the late 70s to 2006 that we start seeing an increase in clotures that are motioned ranging each year from 60 to 80 times. Then, when Obama was elected, the motion to file grew to the 100s until we get to the years 2019 and 2020, Trump's final years in office. The highest number of motions filed were 328, and 270 of those clotures passed. There have only been 2 times in history that the cloture rule was broken. Both times were broken for the same reason. The first time was in 2013, when Democratic Senate Majority Leader Harry M. Reid reduced the number of votes needed for cloture from 60 to 51. Then in 2017, Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, not having enough votes to confirm President Trump's Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch, did the same thing and reduced the number of votes to confirm the current Supreme Court justice. With Biden in office, pressure has been growing to eliminate the filibuster. With the filibuster rule still in place and a split Senate, Democrats would need 10 Republicans included in their 60 votes. Without it, any big legislation bills like the American Jobs Plan would be blocked. With the filibuster gone, Democrats would have an easier time pushing through legislation. However, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema do not want to eliminate the 60-vote threshold. Manchin said he believes that filibusters help the Senate work in bipartisan manner, penning an op-ed published by the Washington Post on April 7th, in which he said if the filibuster is eliminated, quote, a new and dangerous precedent would be set to pass sweeping partisan legislation that changes the direction of our nation every time there is a change in political control, end quote. Manchin voted against Reid in 2013 and McConnell in 2017 for breaking the filibuster. It is unlikely Manchin will be swayed in future attempts to end the filibuster rule. We'd like to end our episode by highlighting the career of former Vice President Walter Mondale, who passed away in his home from natural causes on April 19th. He was 93. Mondale used his office under President Jimmy Carter to bridge a nation broken amid the Cold War and economic turmoil and spent his career fighting for policies related to affirmative action, foreign peace, and equality. Mondale was born in Minnesota in 1928. After serving in the Korean War and attending law school, he launched his political career by working on several campaigns at his home state. He was appointed as Minnesota's Attorney General in 1960, then as U.S. Senator in 1964, where he worked on policies related to fair housing, tax reform, and the desegregation of schools before Jimmy Carter selected him as running mate for the 1976 presidential election. Mondale became the 42nd Vice President of the United States in 1977 and redefined the role by working in closer tandem with the president than prior VPs had. He was the first vice president to have an office in the White House and spent his time working on domestic equity and foreign peace, as well as on the energy crisis and nuclear arms negotiations. When Mondale ran for presidency in 1984, he lost to Ronald Reagan, but in the process, selected the first female running mate of either the Democratic or Republican Party in Geraldine Ferraro, who at the time was a representative of New York. Mondale largely left the public eye following the loss. After his death on April 19th, several politicians, including Carter and President Joe Biden, offered messages of thanks to Mondale for his work in equality and for redefining the role of a vice president. May he rest in peace. Well, that's all we have for today. If you'd like more insight on the happenings in politics and government, subscribe to Insight by GovSight, wherever you listen to podcasts, and catch new episodes every week. And while you're there, take a listen to our interview series, Check In by GovSight. If you like what you hear on any of our pods, drop a rating and review. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GovSight1. Finally, head over to GovSight.com. Learn more about who we are, what we do, and how we make citizenship simplified. I'm Andy Pierce. Have a great day.